Welcome back to Seek Strength and welcome back to Sikistan. I'm Owen. This is Dara. We are strength and conditioning coaches. We coach athletes across a variety of different sports, all the way from speed kayaking to rugby to jiu-jitsu to boxing, weightlifting, powerlifting, everything you can think of. We probably have coached an athlete in that, other than chess, I think, because they use testosterone and growth hormone, and that's just disgusting. Today we're looking at a judo athlete hailing from the land of the Japans. Yes, I've been watching Shogun. This is Joshiro Maruyama. He's a 66 kilo judo athlete, and he is double world champion and a series of other silver medals, but he's won 2 world championships in judo, which is crazy. And obviously, as many of you know, if you're watching this, you know Japan is a powerhouse in judo. I love judo. Sometimes I think I like judo more than I like doing jiu-jitsu, but that is by and by. And today we're starting off with some back squats.
So the big thing when we're looking at this back squat is how classically high bar it is. Obviously, there's a lot of debate in the kind of strength and conditioning world as it merges into powerlifting as to whether it's better to be high bar, whether it's better to be low bar, what each of those squat variations brings to you. To be honest, when we look at judo athletes and we look at most of the combat sports athletes, they get more out of the high bar. That kind of better balance between anterior and posterior dominance, getting some better quad development seems to be more beneficial for them. And when we look at this particular squat, we see really nice vertical torso angle. We see depth that is impeccable, to be quite honest with you. A lot of judo athletes will have really good ass to grass squats, and what you're seeing here is pretty much the perfect depth you need to be squatting to. Now, an interesting aspect of his squat in particular is how wide his stance is. So for a lot of people, when you start going to a high bar style squat, getting the stance that wide will be difficult. A lot of it relies on having quite good external rotation in the hips, and obviously he smashes these here. So really wide stance width really gets those knees out over the kind of middle toe, and it gets a lot of glute activation in there too. A common person you'll see doing this, or kind of the most exemplary version of this, will be someone like Toshiki Yamamoto. So here we have very, very nice Japanese aesthetic squats.
We've seen this for a couple of the judo athletes from Japan. For example, Shohei Ono, one of the obviously greatest Japanese judokas, and he was squatting some crazy weights. And that's one of the big things we look at when we're looking at sports like judo. The power to weight ratio, or the squat to body weight ratio, are kind of a couple of things we'll look at. In this case, we're looking at how heavy can you squat in relation to your body weight. Now, some sports, maybe if you're a 400 meter runner, we're going to have a pretty low standard compared to stronger athletes, throwers, weightlifters, judo athletes. We're going to be looking at, maybe for a runner, if we can do 1.5 times body weight, high bar with good quality squat, maybe for a few reps we're doing good. If you're a soccer player, something like that, you're trying to kind of confine those variables to the sport and see what makes sense and what's realistic for those athletes to actually achieve across a sporting career in a reasonable time frame. When it comes to judo, though, judo is one of those sports where we cannot hide from good strength conditioning. It's highly technical, high amounts of skill, definitely need lots of conditioning, lots of resilience, lots of coordination, but you also just need lots of power. You need lots of strength available to you in different range of motion, and you can't hide from those weaker squats. And obviously, when you're getting up to those higher levels of judo, when you're getting up into the world level and you're trying to win world championships, you're trying to win big grand slams, so you come up against your opponent and you're in the same weight class and he can squat 50, 60 kilos more than you, you're probably going to have similar levels of judo available to you. And it's going to come down to, if he gets a better grip, if he's upper body stronger, if he's more power in his hips and his legs, you're probably going to lose that one. And everyone in judo knows that judo is incredibly receptive to strength and conditioning. So what we like to look to for judo is really the sweet spot is like 2.2 times body weight is a great place to be in. And a minimum, we're really looking for that double body weight. And this is across all levels. Once you're kind of past that first couple of years in judo and you're starting trying to become a competitive judo athlete, it's really great to get close to that double body weight squat. In this case, he's a 66 kilo athlete, probably competes or probably trains around 70 kilos if he cuts a couple of kilos in training. So we're saying here, this is around that 2.2 times body weight. This is 150 kilos. He's doing this for a set of 6. So he's really probably closing in on a 2.7 times body weight, maybe 2.8 times body weight, depending on how hard he's pushing it. So he's really pushing the limits of that strength available to him. And if you can get there, it's great. The only time it's not great is if you're killing yourself in training, you're squatting 5 times a week to get to a triple body weight squat, and you're killing your judo and you can't really spar or train that well, then it doesn't make sense. But if over the course of 3-4 years we can can go, okay, right now I'm at a 1.8 times bodyweight squat. It's pretty good. The depth is good, technique is solid. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm squatting once or twice a week. I have a big off season coming up. Can I add maybe 20, 30 kilos? Can I get over at double body weight? So you might as well look at this and be like, oh, and I'm 130 kilos. And the answer to that is still the same. What if you meet someone in your weight class who is that strong? It might be intimidating. It might be big weights, but that is the nature of competitive sport. And while bodyweight ratios might fall by the wayside a little bit, it's still... you're still looking for those big weights. Maybe it's not exactly the same if you're 120 or 30 kilos, but you're still looking for at least that double body weight squat. So have those ratios in mind when it comes to your squatting. And again, for judo in particular, the squat is such a great one, that high bar squat. And you see loads of them. We see the Georgians doing it. We see some of the French athletes doing it. And it's not to be sniffed at. Like, have that in your training. Any judo athletes I have, all of them are high bar squatting, and it really stays in the training pretty much all year round.
Up next then, we have some single arm cheetah rows. And if you're looking for my particular favourite upper body exercise for combat sports athletes or athletes who are taking a lot of contact, particularly through the shoulders, this is a phenomenally useful exercise. So the big thing with this style of cheetah row is the absolute weight you can use. We see 90 kilos being used here. If he's competing at 70 kilos, you have a massive ability to be able to stabilize that shoulder, to be able to drive obviously with the legs, but with the upper shoulder and back as well is really, really important. And when we look at the specific use case for judo is not only about throwing another athlete, where having strong shoulders and being able to influence their posture and influence their upper body is really important, but it's also being able to resist that movement that the other athlete is trying to impart onto you. So imagine Owen grabs my collar, maybe he's driving with the forearm across my neck here, and I'm trying to resist that movement. Being able to upright row 90 kilos not only is important, but being able to resist that movement on the way down is absolutely vital. So I think a lot of the time when we look at the specific lifts themselves, we really think about the kind of concentric portion. We tend to think about it's all about that row, it's all about getting a good muscle contraction through that entire range of motion. But it really is about being able to control that weight and being able to resist that lengthening of those muscle tissues as well. So the eccentric phase is so vital. And particularly in this case, that dumbbell is moving fast. Gravity is pulling that 90 kilos down very, very fast. And so just having that ability to stabilize it, keep the shoulder set back in the socket, hold it, get to a straight elbow and go immediately again is incredibly useful.
Now, in this case, you might be looking at this, and if you're thinking about it from a purely muscle building or hypertrophy aspect, you're thinking, okay, that range of motion isn't great. But like Dara was talking about there, it is, in this case, when it gets this heavy and this level of athlete, there is times where these cheetah rows are more of a power exercise compared to a pure strength or pure muscle building exercise, or a combination of those two. Now, this isn't something you should have in your training all year round. This isn't something which you should be doing exclusively, and this should be used intermittently, but it can be beneficial. Now, there's obviously a minimum range of motion that's effective, and this is similar to that conversation around using box squats for athletes as opposed to full depth squats or deeper squats, and they have their places at times in training. So in this case, if you're using cheetah dumbbell rows, we would still like to see a full range of motion, very, very close to or touching your chest, arm's length, maybe even a little bit of rotation at the bottom to get a bit more range of motion. We can go from strict dumbbell rows. We can love stuff like 45-degree steel rows. We love stuff like bench rows, are all fantastic. Seated horizontal cable rows, excellent choices. But in judo, there is a lot of benefit to this. There's a benefit to jiu-jitsu and some other fight sports where we're using this cheetah row as a kind of a power exercise, similar to like something, if you categorize in your head like plyometric training or med ball slams, this is kind of where that comes in. So if we're looking to build a bigger back, obviously we're looking for full range of motion, controlled eccentrics, controlled motions where we're not using a lot of body English, but these do have a great place in training, and you need to ensure that, does it make sense for you? Are you doing it to a technique that actually makes sense? And are you moving it over range of motion that's reasonable? You know, if we're literally moving this over 2 or 3 inches, obviously it's becoming ineffective, but he's moving this over a pretty solid range of motion. This is 1.5-ish times body weight, and it's giving him some effect, but we just need to be smart when we're using this style of row.
Now, the last thing we should mention when we look at these rows, and this is very common in the fight sport community, is people question the use of a pulling strap. So in this case, he has a pulling strap just on the working hand. He wraps that around and it limits the amount of grip force he has to use to get that dumbbell or whatever it is moving. Now, what people commonly say is, oh, you're in a grip dominant sport, so grip is amazingly important or insanely important in judo, and being able to hold on to that judo uniform as hard as you possibly can for as long as you can is really vital. So why is he not using this opportunity to train his grip as well? So the first thing is, grip is insanely specific. So gripping the gi or gripping the uniform is different from gripping the dumbbell or gripping a kettlebell. The second thing is, he will be doing so much of that specific training that he does not need to be doing it in the gym. So if he's there and he's probably on the mats 5, 6, 7 times a week, whether it's just sparring or whether it's just light drilling work, he's still drilling that specific grip work he has to do, and he won't get the same stimulus from just using the dumbbell. The last thing is, as well, is so much of his training, as we're about to see again here, is grip dominated, and he won't be able to use those straps or facilitate his grip with that heavy load on all the exercises. So if you have somebody and they're really getting a big grip emphasis or forearm burnout from doing rope climbs, pull-ups, battle ropes, all these things we're going to see later on, then we don't need to be taxing them in every single aspect of their upper body training.
Next up, we've got some weighted pull-ups, and he's doing these with a little bit of a kipping aspect as well. So the same principles apply if we're looking for muscle hypertrophy, some a bit more higher force work rather than speed strength work. And if you want to look like an absolute boss in your gi or your kimono, having a wide back will hide a bit of your belly fat as well. So it gets you in a lot of aspects there in your training. So if you want to look like a king in your gi, it does pay to have a wide back. And weighted pull-ups are very, very useful. If we watch this video, we can see he's doing a little bit of kipping, but he's then controlling that eccentric on the way down, so we're getting some of those benefits. Similar thought process again to those dumbbell rows. Are we using them for strength? Are we using them for more hypertrophy or muscle building focus, or are we using them for that kind of power output, which can have their place? Now, personally, we wouldn't really use the kipping weighted pull-ups as an aspect for that power exercise, but it can be used. There's no reason it can't not be technically, but it's something you'd probably stay away from unless you're a very experienced athlete. Combination with this, then we have also some horizontal rows, and machine rows, cable rows, isolated fixed fulcrum rows are fantastic. In fact, I would argue it's probably one of the best upper back exercises if we're trying to build a little bit more thickness and density, because it's so easy to allow body English to creep into those rows when we're using barbell rows. Even if we're doing barbell rows from the pin, if we're doing dumbbell rows, unless we're isolating the chest and the rest of the body and taking the legs out of it, we do get a little assistance in that. So if we're looking for that muscle building aspect, as soon as we kind of isolate everything else, they do really give a great benefit. So these horizontal rows are great. Horizontal cable rows are great. Again, that chest supported seal rows or dumbbell rows are another fantastic option.
Yeah, I think as well, when we look at a lot of the international style training halls, you'll have barbells, plates, dumbbells, boxes, squat stands, and all those. And this is probably the top 3 most common machine you'll see in there. Will be some sort of cable row or some sort of machine row like that. So that success does leave hints. We tend to see them a lot in the international training halls.
Next, we've got some dumbbell high pulls plus dumbbell squat snatches. Now, this is an interesting choice, and it's probably one that if we look at in terms of attributes needed for this exercise, it's probably not one that's going to pay off for a lot of athletes, because when we use dumbbells, again, we're limited by that grip, we're limited by the implement we're using, and then we also need to be using a certain threshold of weight to be getting effective training. So when we look at these dumbbell snatches, there's a couple of attributes that are high in demand. We need a lot of mobility, crazy amount of mobility in comparison to everything else. Like, it's really ticking up there to doing a dumbbell squat snatch. The grip strength available, the implement of the dumbbell are all things that really over-index on those particular demands compared to the benefits you're getting from this. And then again, if you're a heavier athlete, if you're a 100 kilo athlete, you're not going to get much benefit from 25 or 30 kilo kind of dumbbell squat snatches. If you're a lighter athlete, it's going to be a little bit easier for you to do that, but then you're going to have to work up on them in that weight. So it's not that it's not beneficial, but it's a good idea to think about these things in your training and look at what are the demands of this exercise, what am I trying to get from this exercise, and what is this exercise actually going to give me in relation to my ability to do this exercise.
Yeah, it does bring up, like, we're always talking about being as efficient as possible with your training. Now, we don't know the context around this, why it's being used, as with all these things. But with that efficiency always comes those questions Owen is asking. Now, an interesting side of this, when we see single arm dumbbell snatches being done in competition, we usually see them being done in the kind of CrossFit style thing, right? So probably similar weights, probably similar reps and sets being done here. We tend to see slightly different technique being used when we're going to finish those squat snatches. So usually we have the thumb pointed in towards us, so we have some internal rotation of the shoulders that allows for that slightly narrower stance. You'll see a very wide stance here because that dumbbell is going horizontally in between the two knees, so you need a lot of room for it. The other interesting aspect of this is when he goes to that kind of semi-catch position, he actually shifts his feet in to something that looks like the kind of sissy squat position. He's never going to be catching these. It is really just that kind of high pull and that practicing of that strong contraction with the relaxation immediately afterwards. Now, these are one of my favorite muscle endurance exercises for the judo athletes and for the jiu-jitsu athletes, particularly for lighter weight classes. Once you kind of get up to 95, 100, 105 into the ultra heavy classes, they become far more difficult. But definitely for the lighter weight classes, the rope climbs are a great conditioning tool. Now, commonly people will say, oh, it's a rope climb, it's very strength orientated, how is it conditioning? When we talk about conditioning here, what we're really looking at doing is developing work capacity in the very specific demands of this sport. So although it's not a highly aerobic conditioning drill, what you're doing here is you're conditioning those muscles to have the level of endurance they're going to need. Now, there's a few interesting things here when we compare this to other athletes who might do their rope climbs. We'll see a lot of the gymnasts as they're doing rope climbs will actually be able to get into that fully locked out overhead position. Then they'll pull with their shoulders and get a full range of motion on these. When we see the combat athletes doing it, it's very rare they'll be doing it with those techniques. So they might do it on the way down, so they'll still get that full eccentric where they're going through the full range of motion, but mostly they'll keep a level of elbow flexion that will make it a small bit easier. When we look at very high demand exercises like these, a small bit of facilitation is absolutely no bad thing at all. He might be doing 5 sets of 4 climbs on these. It takes a massive toll on the body. And particularly when we're looking to bring up the efficiency thing again, we need to make sure the load going through the athlete isn't excessive. So although it mightn't be the standard technique we'd see or perfect style of technique like a fully ass to grass high bar squat, this is still a very valuable exercise for those athletes who need strong grips and strong upper bodies.
Now, just as a replacement for this, if you don't have access to a rope, is you can do 2 things. If you're lucky enough to have a cage in your home gym or maybe in the gym you're going to, you can get a rope. Again, it's a little bit of a specific piece of equipment, but if it is something you want to pursue in your training, you can do a shorter range of motion if you have a high enough cage, or maybe you have a H-iron or a beam or a wooden crossover somewhere in your shed or wherever you're training that you can loop the rope over. And if it's a shorter distance, going up and down on that distance will work. Again, less equipment still trying to do this. If you have a squat rack or preferably a cage or somewhere pretty solid, you can put your barbell in the rack, put the weights on the rack, loop the rope over the barbell, attach weights to the end of it, again aiming for your body weight, and you can at least get some grip endurance training from that, where you just pull it up, let it go down, pull it up again. Again, it's not an exact replacement, but having 15, 18, 20 foot of a rope and a ceiling available to you isn't always applicable. So CrossFit gyms will have them a lot, but a lot of other gyms don't have access to those. So there is ways you can do it. It's not quite the same, but you can still get some of the benefits. Now, next up, we have got one of the most common exercises we see Japanese judo athletes doing, and that is hill sprints, usually hill sprints in incredibly scenic environments. Now, hill sprints are a fantastic exercise. We can do these in one of 2 ways. If we were a speed athlete and we're trying to do them faster, we can do shorter distances where we're not going to that high aerobic threshold, or we're turning to anaerobic. We're really minimum distances similar maybe to what you're sprinting or running in your track event. You know, if you're 60, 100 meter sprinter, we can do these over shorter distances. We're really aiming for speed and work on the acceleration portion. But for general athletes in conditioning where running isn't your sport, these are an exceptional exercise, especially in a sport like judo where the rounds aren't incredibly long, you know, if we compare them to a marathon or a swimming event. We have much longer conditioning demands, whereas we have much higher threshold of conditioning demands in judo rounds. We have to go fast and we need to be able to recover quickly, and doing longer hill sprints are an exceptional way of building that threshold, like things like lactic threshold, the VO2 max training, where we're really pushing ourselves to the limit to consume and use oxygen as much as possible. And if you can do it in the woods, in the hills in Japan, it's going to be more motivating. I don't have woods in Japan, but I do have hill sprints near my home, which is really nice environment. And it's not something that's talked about as much, is athletes getting out of the gym, getting out of your conditioning and machines and being in a green environment is incredibly beneficial, on top of the disgustingly punishing long hill sprints.
Now, if you're doing hill sprints in your training and you're doing them for this specific aspect, what you're looking to get is that lactic threshold. So if you don't have a lactate monitor with you, which I presume you won't have, what are you looking for here? You're looking for that deep burning sensation in your quads, your ass, your calves, everything you're using. You want to be getting that deep burning sensation. And then when you're recovering back down from it, you should have a small bit of dissipation in that deep burning. But once you're back at the start line, you're pretty much going again. So we never want to be going beyond that point where you completely seize up and you can't run anymore. But we don't want to be dipping out of that window either. So what we're looking for when we're in the lactate threshold training periods, or if we're using it for that, we're looking to push as hard as we possibly can. We need to have a defined amount of reps we're going to do. So a lot of the time people will show up and they should probably be doing 8 reps or 12 reps or 15 reps of these particular hill sprints. And they might do 3 or 4 and then they'll feel overly gassed, or they'll really cramp up, or they won't be able to do anymore. Their technique will fall apart, or their times will drop massively. Then they've pushed too hard too early. But what we really want is, once we're hitting that really deep burn, that acid burn in the muscle, we want to be staying there for as long as possible. So this is one of those times where you do have to go to the well. This isn't a kind of training session where we're going to be really focusing on technical aspects of it. You're going to have to push hard during these. These will be disgusting, and it'll probably be one of the hardest training sessions you're going to do during that training week.
So there is benefits, of course, to being moderate with your conditioning. It's really important to have a good base of zone 2 when we're doing these. And if we're doing speed, obviously, we're not going to try go to failure. We're going to be fast over defined distances and times. But when we're looking for this high aerobic threshold and high conditioning threshold, pushing yourself to that limit, push yourself to that conditioning failure is really valuable. Now, obviously, we can't do this every week and every day, because it's going to impact the rest of your training. You're going to have DOMs. You're going to use up a lot of your resources for the training. But at right times throughout the year, and in the right circumstances, with the right days, with the right time to recover after, just pushing yourself to the absolute limit on this conditioning is incredibly valuable. Another great thing about hill sprints like this is that they're pretty low equipment, so you find that venue, and generally in a sport like judo, you're going to have training partners, and having that option to get those training partners without them, call up your buddies, call up your training partners and tell them, come out, you're doing sprints on Saturday morning, maybe you're doing them after the class. It doesn't take that long. You can get a great conditioning session in like 15 minutes with hills, and you can drive home after crying. And it's super valuable to do them as a team, because you'll push yourself harder, you'll probably do more than you would have done otherwise, and it is a great team bonding experience. So never forget that aspect when we're doing S&C and stuff. Is obviously it's an individual sport, but you do need training partners, and this is a great way to shuttle along that training environment and push yourself.
Now, finally, here we have some HIIT training, or high intensity interval training. We have a combination of exercises. The first thing we see here is some quite easy battle rope work. Same thing as we talked about for the rope climbs here. We're building some local muscular endurance in the arms, forearms and upper arms, maybe a bit of shoulders as well, depending on what variation we're doing. Then we have some very simple just shuttle sprints over and back. These are something that are quite valuable, but tend to break down very quickly, especially if you have a few athletes. These are a very easy place for people to hide. Now, most athletes don't go to training so they can hide and take a break or not work quite that hard. But definitely if you're doing these in training, that kind of crab shuttle to the side, my number one piece of advice is keep an eye on the amount of strides you're taking on each one. So 2 things tend to happen when we get tired. We either start short stepping, and you'll go from maybe 3 shuttles on each of those runs to 5 or 6 shuttles on each of those runs, or you'll start long stepping and you'll get a lot shorter in between, or you'll get a lot longer to do one of those lateral crab shuttles. So if you're there and you know, okay, when I'm sharp, when I'm not quite fatigued, it's drive off my right leg, 1 step, 2 step, touch the ground. Then you need to keep a constant count in your head as you're going through those. They're really valuable. They're a great training and conditioning tool, but make sure you don't break down. Make sure you don't suddenly start going really short shuttle steps or really long shuttle steps.
Now, one particular thing about this that we're not huge fans of is the use of the barbell in the circuit training. So in this case, they may or may not be using it. Again, we don't have context on what's going on. We're just using the clip to talk about it as in context for your own training. But they might be using this as part of kind of power training, which it doesn't really get its effect when we're highly fatigued because we're not moving that barbell as fast as we could. Now, they also might just be using it as part of that conditioning circuit, which I suspect is what is probably going on here. Now, there's nothing wrong in theory when you're looking to get the benefit for your conditioning using the barbells, but we don't like the effects that they have on your technique and your reproducibility of your technique in the other areas. So clean high pulls, a great exercise for judo athletes to do. Power cleans, fantastic exercises for judo athletes to do if you can do them, if you can learn a little bit of that technique. They're unbelievable, an exceptional exercise. One of the best sports. Judo would benefit from a big power clean. Now, if you can power clean 1.2, 1.5 times body weight, that's excellent. But as you know, they're highly technical and there's a couple of different attributes that we're always working on. And weightlifting, you need to think about your technique as a pool of water. And then when we do bad lifts or poor technique, we're muddying those waters. We're adding a poor quality dye to that water that's not reinforcing good technique. And if you're not a weightlifter, your technique probably isn't as defined as it should be, or as you would like it to be, or as you need it to be. So when we do things like this in circuits, we're going to have technical breakdown. So it's far better in these cases to keep generally barbells away from them. That's just one of the better ways to do that, is just keep barbell movements away from them. And if they are barbell movements, have them pretty basic, maybe a pulling pattern, maybe a squatting pattern, but just in general, if you're trying to get that strength endurance or not really strength endurance, muscular endurance, keep it to stuff that is really low skill that can fall to technical breakdown. Now, there's not really much injury risk in these. Really what we're worried about is that you're not getting your kind of power effect from them as much because the barbell is going to slow down your fatigue, but you're really also getting poorer quality technique in them, and that might transfer and probably will transfer to other areas. So we need to be keeping, when we're doing barbell movements, especially stuff that in relation to the Olympic lifts, quality needs to be of paramount, and it is a really fine seesaw. Of the worse reps we do, the more we are reinforcing those worse reps. So in this case, it'd be better to do something, maybe if you want to include a barbell, maybe he was looking for maybe some grip stuff or a bit of movement, he could just simply do deadlifts. Clean grip deadlifts would be perfectly acceptable, or maybe you could do a sandbag hold or a sandbag carry or fireman's carry or something like that if you really wanted to get a loading part of his conditioning, which isn't wrong. But generally for your own training, at least keep the barbells away from circuit style HIIT training and keep them basic, low skill, high capacity. And if you're really fucked up from the conditioning, there's no chance of you really hurting yourself from a loaded implement. Now, if you are looking to do your own S&C training, which maybe you are from watching this video, check out the Sika Strength app on iOS and Android. We have tons of programs that will work incredibly well for judo. We can start with some specific stuff like a squat only program. The rotating your squat program is fantastic. Loads of athletes, thousands of athletes have used this program, anywhere from 20 to 50 kilos onto their back squat. There's 2 different squat programs. There's a power clean program. There's a becoming a horse program, which would suit judo incredibly well. Looking at upper body hypertrophy, squatting, pulling, and some power exercises in there. There's 2 blocks that are available to you. Then we also have a off-season athlete program, which is just general work capacity, some higher volume lifting in that program. There's also conditioning on the app as well, and more conditioning to come in the future. So loads of stuff on the app for judo athletes. And if you want to take your judo to the next game, do check it out. Links below.